Okay, so today we're talking about warmers. So let's start by defining what a warmer is. Businesses, youth groups, schools, volunteer organizations use these games and activities to warm up for the stuff that's going to be happening later in the day. Essentially, they're just a bunch of stupid games, but they do serve an important purpose to the overall flow of the day. They may be used to model a kind of skill like communication or teamwork. They may be intended to get strangers, people who don't know each other, talking to each other for the first time. You can use them to break people into groups or just generally get people to become comfortable with the environment that they're in, get to know the building and even the furniture. You'll notice there's a video here next to me that's showing a bunch of warmers, and I'll provide the link to that video in the description. But what you will notice in both this video and the videos that are going to come up on the next slide is that none of these warmers that I'm showing are actually possible to do in an online virtual environment. There's a variety of reasons for this. People who in an online environment can't well, they can't high five, they can't touch each other, they can't be in close physical proximity to each other. These all use shared props, objects that everyone is touching at the same time. Nevertheless, the concept of a warmer is still very important in an online setting, possibly even more important in an online setting. And we will talk about warmer theory in general in this video, but we will also be talking about how that theory applies even if you're in an online setting, like a Google Classroom, a Zoom, a Teams meeting. Okay, so I like to break warmers into two types. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but I think it helps me think about what's actually happening. The first type of warmer is what I like to call the icebreaker, or what everyone calls the icebreaker. The purpose of the icebreaker is basically just a get-to-know-you activity. It's so that everyone in the group can get to know each other's names if they don't know each other yet. Usually icebreakers consist of fun, lots of movement, hopefully lots of like laughing, and it's really just intended to get people, the objective of the icebreaker is to get people comfortable with where they are and who they're with. Contrast that with the second type of warmer that we're calling the team builder. The team builder presumes that you already know the people that you're with, even if you don't know them very well, you've met before you know each other's names. Now we're taking it to the next level. The team builder is going to drill you on a certain kind of skill, usually communication, movement, coordination, teamwork, the ability to follow directions, the ability to give directions. Team builders will often present you with a problem and ask you to solve that problem. And then normally at the end of a team building exercise, there will be a kind of debriefing where you get to talk to your team members and decide what did you do well, what could you have done better. Again, these games are all very stupid. There's nothing really intrinsically important to the games you're playing, but the skills you use in these games should model real-world skills that you'll use later on. Now, as we start to talk about how to design a warmer, whether it's online or in person, there's a few things we need to consider. Environment, timing and atmosphere, audience, and lastly, but of course most importantly, logistics. We're going to take each of these in a turn. Let's start with environment. The environment is important to designing your warmer for a couple of reasons. You want to consider the physical space that you have. How much space do you actually have to move around in? Do you have space to run? Do you have space to throw a ball? Do you need to move furniture? If so, do you need to get permission to move the furniture, or are you just allowed to do it? Second, this seems like something may not be that important, and often it's overlooked, but the concept of volume concerns. Do you have to worry about how much noise you're making? If you're in a retreat house, are there other people in the retreat house using it perhaps to sleep in or to have prayer experiences? If so, you don't want to be making a ton of noise in the next room. Beyond that, you have other environmental hazards. For instance, does the back porch have a wasp nest under it? The grass outside might look really fun to run in barefoot, but maybe there's acorns in the grass, and you don't know these things until you actually test them out ahead of time. Getting to know your environment is extremely important before you actually set up and run your warmer. The most important question you always want to be asking yourself is, how can I use my space to my advantage? What does this space have that no other space has, and how can I use that? It's tempting when I talk about this kind of these environmental challenges to say, well, these don't apply to online or Zoom-based warmers, and in fact they do. When you look at your environment, how much physical space do you have? Often people will say, well, if you're on a Zoom call, there is no physical space, and that's not true. The meeting isn't taking place on a computer. The meeting is taking place in lots of people's rooms scattered all over. So while these people can't be in close physical proximity to each other, they are living and existing in a physical space, and you can use that physical space to your advantage if you're allowed to. So games like a scavenger hunt might ask participants in the warmer to go and collect things around their physical space. This is not only good to get people up and moving, but it's helpful because it actually functions then also as a good icebreaker as you get to show off items from your personal life, your personal space. When we talk about volume concerns, it's tempting to assume that in an online call there aren't any, but again, how do you know what's in the next room in that person's house? How do you know that that person's siblings or parents aren't currently on their own call for school or for a meeting? How do you know there's not a baby sleeping in the next room over? So you need to be cognizant of the fact that there may still be noise concerns even though you're in a virtual environment. And of course, hazards probably speak for themselves, and we'll talk about those later. As far as timing and atmosphere goes, you really want to consider what your objective is. Is the purpose of your warmer to get people to know each other, or is the purpose of your warmer to get people to learn how to work together better? You're probably going to run a series of warmers. You'll probably use both of these by the time you're running a retreat or a school function. You'll probably end up using all of these, but the timing of them is very important. If people are just getting to know each other, it's probably not a good idea to throw a team builder at them when they don't even know each other's names. There's not a lot of teamwork that can happen if you don't even know how to address someone. On the other hand, if it's late in the week, you've spent 24/7 with these people in a retreat house, and then all of a sudden at the end you do a get to know you game, it just falls a little bit flat. It's kind of like, well, I already know all these people. Why am I playing a game where I have to get to know their name? So just the timing of your warmer is very important. Icebreakers usually come very early. Once everyone gets to know each other, there's really no point to run an icebreaker. You're probably heading more in the team builder direction. You also want to be cognizant of what comes before and after your warmer in the overall schedule. So if you're running a warmer, if you're part of a retreat team, or if you're helping lead a school function, it's very possible, in fact likely, that you're not in charge of everything that's going on. You're just in charge of running your piece of this overall project. You want to know what's coming right before you and right after you, because if what comes right before you is something very solemn like a prayer or a memorial service, you don't want to then lead right into like a fun running around upbeat kind of game, because you want to be respectful of the atmosphere that's been built through the process of the retreat. And the same goes for after. If you get people up and running around, it may then be difficult to go into a prayer service right afterwards, because everyone's all sweaty and their heart rate is elevated. It's just probably not a good idea. And the last thing you want to be really pay attention to is your start time and your end time. When you're given times to begin and end, you want to respect the time of the people coming after you. So if you run short, now the host has to fill that time that you were supposed to be running your warmer. If you run long, you're running into the time of the next presenter. Okay, audience, you want to be aware of any special concerns or limitations. This can include in person. It can include maybe the person's in a wheelchair or on crutches, meaning they can't get up and move around physically. If people are all going to be at the beach, you can assume maybe they're already wearing sandals. That might make it difficult for people to run around and move very quickly on foot. If you're online, you have to plan for the eventuality that someone's camera is going to be broken, or that maybe their email is on the fritz and they can't receive your messages. Now, you can't plan for all of this stuff, but it's important to just troubleshoot and keep these things in mind. When you're running warmers for a live environment, you don't plan for one of your participants to be on crutches, but you do have to have a plan in case that happens. So this doesn't mean that you shouldn't plan activities where people run around and do lots of movement, or a Zoom activity where people use their cameras, but you should have a kind of idea in the back of your mind for what you're going to do if something like this comes up. Second is size, and this is probably the most important thing to consider for your audience. The size, the number of people you're working with, really impacts the type of game that you're going to run. If the group is too small, you're probably not going to want to play something like Do You Love Your Neighbor? One of these, big moving around games, musical chairs, for example. You're going to want to scale the game down to a smaller size. If the group is very, very large, it's probably not a good idea to run a game like Two Truths and a Lie, which requires everyone to go through, name their two truths, and have time for guessing. If you're doing this with 20 people, that's going to take like 3 hours. So you want to make sure that the game you're running is appropriately sized to the number of people who will be playing. And lastly, I'm throwing this one on there just because it's important to think about age. If you're running warmers for very young children, you probably don't want to have anything that's too cerebral, too heady, too like advanced problem solving type games. Probably not going to go over well. Lastly, and probably most importantly, is logistics. Number one, what supplies do you need? Do you have access to them? Do you need permission? Is someone else going to get them for you? These are all questions you want answered well in advance of the warmer. Please do not wait until the day you're running the warmer to find out if you have access to the supplies that you need, especially if those are going to make or break the game that you're running. Number two, how are you going to give instructions? I see this all the time where we get up to run a warmer, and the warmer involves a large group being broken up into smaller groups. The same thing may happen on Zoom. A Zoom call, you will break people up into smaller groups. And I see the person running the warmer start by breaking everyone up into small groups and then attempt to give directions to everyone who's already been broken up into small groups. So there's these little groups scattered around the room or the field or on the Zoom call, and they're having to shout and no one can hear them, and people are talking over them, and it's just a nightmare. If you need to give directions, make sure you have that planned into your actual script for how you're running the warmer. Give directions when everyone's together, and then split them up. Just one example of why thinking about giving directions is important. Along with how you're giving directions is who is giving those directions. So you should decide this in advance. If you're on a team of people running a warmer, don't go in assuming someone else is going to do all the talking. You need to decide ahead of time who's doing the talking and who's just going to be standing by to help out if anyone gets lost. Probably the best piece of advice I can offer you is to start early. Any project that requires cooperation from other people is important to get the ball rolling early. In many cases, participants running warmers are going to have to submit paperwork to me for approval, and I need to read that paperwork, provide feedback on that paperwork, and give it back to them before they're allowed to proceed. But I have my own schedule, and I have things going on in my life too. So if you hand me paperwork, you can't presume that I'm going to be able to get it back to you within 5 minutes. Certainly I'll do the best that I can, but everyone has their own lives, everyone has their own schedule, everyone has their own pressures. So out of respect for the people you're working with, just try to get things done early so that they have time to get back to you. And up till now, we've just been kind of talking about warmer theory in general. Right now, I just want to give some quick tips for online warmers specifically. Communication is key. I think we sometimes underestimate how much of our language comes across through body language, comes across physically. The amount of directions I hear when people run warmers that actually are just pointless, meaningless words, it's kind of astounding. Phrases like, do this, stand here. These are words that really aren't needed because the important information being conveyed there is being conveyed through body language. If I say do this, I'm asking you to copy what I'm doing physically. If I ask you to stand there, I'm going to point to where I want you to stand. On a Zoom call, you can't always presume that you're going to have that kind of visual interaction. So making sure that you drill yourself on exactly what you're going to say, maybe even write up a script ahead of time, can be really important for making sure everyone understands the directions they're being given. Keep in mind that on an online call, not everyone is seeing the same screen that you are. This not only means that they could be switching between speaker view and gallery view on their end, it also means that even if you command everyone or give instructions to everyone to be in gallery view, not everyone's gallery view looks the same because the way it's presented, whether you're in Zoom, Google, or teams, it's always going to appear differently to different people. So you can't presume that the layout of the participants in the warmer is going to be the same for everyone, which really throws a wrench into a lot of games that might involve, pointing to different quadrants of the screen. I can't tell you how many horrible tragedies I've seen warmers turn into because of audio-video delay. Please remember that there's a delay between what someone is saying and what they're doing and when you see them say and do these things, which means just please don't ever ask a group of people in an online video call to try to sing together, to sing happy birthday. Even saying a prayer like the Lord's Prayer, everyone knows the words, but my goodness, when you try to get everyone to do it at the same time on a call, it's disastrous. So many warmers rely on audio-visual timing, and you just can't rely on it in a Zoom call. I'm not saying that you have to avoid it completely, but just please be cautious with it, because that audio-video delay really can make a good idea of a warmer just completely fall apart. My last piece of advice is just practice. Sometimes you can't foresee the things that will go wrong until they do go wrong. So if you're working with a team of people, it's a great idea just to set up a call for yourselves, set up a video call, and run through the particulars of what you're going to be doing ahead of time, so that you can see what's going to happen, catch any errors that might come up. So that's warmers. We talked a little bit about the theory behind what warmers are and how online warmers are different than physical warmers. Good luck planning your warmer, and that's all for now.